Alright, welcome everybody to my tutorial on how to emulate the particle effects that happen when you make contact with targets in Kingdom Hearts. What I'm talking about, of course, are these beautiful, gummy star explosions that happen when you hit the Heartless. It's gorgeous, there are all these lights and sparkles everywhere, so I'm just going to go through how I've tried to recreate them in Unity 3D. The first thing I want to look at is just a breakdown of what's actually happening there. So I've extracted some frames that I think are quite relevant to the explosions, just so we can have a close look at what's going on. Alright, so we'll just go through a quick breakdown of the different elements that are happening within this hit sequence, just so we have a better idea of what we're actually trying to emulate. The first thing I'll draw your attention to, just in these first frames here, is something we'll emulate a little bit further down the line, but it's just how Sora is sliding forward that little bit as part of his hit, just adds a bit of a look of motion there, and also in these later frames, just how the Heartless is moving back as well. So again, just later on in the tutorial, show you how to quickly emulate that just using code. Alright, so there are two particle systems that I want us to look at today. The first is what happens when Sora actually hits a Heartless, just a standard hit. The second is what happens when Sora kills a Heartless, which is slightly different. So when Sora actually does a standard hit on a Heartless, there are four effects I'd like us to look at. First one here is just a sunburst coming out from the middle. The second are these little white sparkles here. And the third are these gummy stars. So the fourth effect hasn't actually started yet, so just a couple of quick points on these particles at the beginning. When they all start off, you'll notice they all start from the middle, from the contact point, and they're all actually really small. As we move on to the next frame, we'll notice how these particle effects have changed. So the sun flare, it's gotten quite large, it's at least as tall as Sora there. The white sparkles, they've started to fly out quite quickly, and they're getting a little bit bigger. These gummy stars, unlike the white sparkles, they're only going downwards, they're not flying out to the sides or up. They're looking really gummy, and they feel like they have weight. They feel heavy, and that's kind of the fun of these yellow stars here and what makes them different from the sparkles. They're also going large, but at a much quicker speed than the white sparkles. So again, it's just adding to that look of weight and this nice gummy feel. As we go forward one more frame, we'll notice once again that all of our particle effects have kept growing and moving in the directions that they were originally moving. They've all gotten quite big there. However, we'll also notice these blue stars that have come up. So this is the fourth particle effect, the one that I was talking about. Unlike the yellow stars, even though they've got the same rounded edges, unlike the yellow stars, they keep their size. They didn't start small, they just started at their current size and they're not rotating. So you'll also notice the yellow stars, as they fall, they've all kind of twisted a little bit. These blue stars, however, they're staying same size, staying on their rotation, and they're only coming out sideways instead of down, because they don't have the same weight, but they're not as light as those white particles, which are flying up into the air as well. The other change, we'll notice that our sunflower has actually started changing colour there, and that's part of its fade-out process. Over its lifetime, it's going from the nice yellow to pale yellow, and it's warming and becoming quite pinky orange as time goes on. Last couple of frames here are just looking at how everything fades out. They just finish growing, spinning, that sort of thing. We'll notice that the yellow stars, as time progresses, they actually get smaller again, so they start tiny, grow big, and then they go small again before they disappear. We'll notice that the white stars, they're just fading out there as they reach the ends of their lifetime, and if we move back to the yellow stars, we'll notice that they have this bright glow around them, which lasts a little bit longer than the rest of the particle effects. So that's what happens on a standard hit. So now let's have a look at what happens when Sora actually kills one of the Heartless and defeats it. So it starts off looking quite the same. We have the sun flare, and you can see the standard particles from a hit coming out as well. However, we have this additional cloud appearing in the middle, which grows quite quickly. So there are two parts of it that I'd like to point out. One is the bright yellow on the inside. It's similar to the sun flare, and it still has a couple of rays of light, but it's a much bigger cloud of gold in the middle there. Around this cloud of gold, you'll notice this purple tinging, which when we skip forward a frame, we'll notice that the purple cloud is quite large, larger than the flare of light though. As time goes on, again, we can notice the normal particle effects from a standard hit happening too, so we still have the blue stars, still have the gummy yellow stars. However, as the white, dense cloud of light fades away, we'll notice that we also have these white particles which start when the dense light as well, but then they become purple as they fly out. So that's a new particle effect as well. That only happens when a Heartless is killed. We'll notice that after the yellow light has faded out, it becomes very bright pink. And once it's gone, we are left with the purple cloud, which kind of just drifts upwards a bit like smoke at the end there. Alright, so just starting off with how we're going to recreate some of these elements in Unity. Just to begin with, you probably want to download the assets that I've included with this tutorial. You can make your own as well, but the important thing is that you have the images that I've made to replicate the particle effects. Again, you can make them in Photoshop or any other program if you wanted to, but it's probably easier, for the tutorial at least, just to use mine. So in Unity, we're just going to start off creating a new project. Pretty standard stuff. I'm going to make mine on the desktop. There we go. So while my project's going to be created, you'll notice on my desktop here, I've got just the elements that I've included in your tutorial. I'm going to copy them, and then as you should, inside my project here, into the assets folder, I'm just going to add them there so they're nice and ready for me to use. One other thing I will get you guys to do is download either the first person character controller, which is standard in the Unity assets. So in assets, import package, and you can import the characters if you want here. However, the one I'm going to use, which is free to use, so feel free to download it as well, is if we just go over to the asset store here. In the asset store here, I'm just going to look up third person character controller, selecting free only, and picking the first one that comes up, this third person controller by Invector, and I'm just going to download that. Again, I'm picking this one just as in Kingdom Hearts you use a third person character, and it's going to be a lot easier to use just a free asset, as the important part in this tutorial isn't building the character itself, it's more about the particle effects that come from the hit itself, which is what we'll recreate. But just to save time, we'll just use one of these free character controllers. Again, you can use the free ones that come with Unity as well. I just prefer to use this one. So now that I've downloaded it, I'm just going to import it into my project. That's fine. Cool. Alright, you'll notice it comes with a lot of these extra things just added on top. I'm not entirely sure which ones we need, except I can see we don't need these new assets here. We don't need any of the environment, we're not using that, we just want the controller. For the rest, doesn't matter so much, we might as well get rid of the audio, we don't care about that as well. We do need the prefabs. And again, just to make sure we don't accidentally break anything, I might just leave the rest of it there. Just give yourselves a little bit of space there as well. So first of all, just remove the directional light that's in the scene there. The reason for this is if we look inside our prefabs folder, you'll notice I've already made a stage here, which has its own lights there, just a standard directional light. This area light, just make sure it's over in real time. That way our stage is actually kind of lit up there as well. So now that we've got that, in the assets folder, just on the left there, just hit the Invector third person controller and just go into the folders until we hit the prefabs. So this is the controller that we just downloaded. I'm just going to drag and drop it into my hierarchy. We'll notice he's appeared all the way at the side here in one of the walls. Just to put him back in the middle, over in the transform in the inspector, I'm just going to reset it. To turn it all to 0, I'm going to double click its name back in the hierarchy just to bring my viewpoint back over to him. Notice, here we are, beautiful little robot man. So now that we have a character in the scene as well, we might as well just start building our particle effects. Now that we've built our scene, I'm just going to show you how to import our materials and our images just for our particle systems. So if we go down to our materials folder, you notice I have a few things here included for you already. So we have these orbs. These are just standard Unity materials. They're very, very basic. All it is just to make our scene look not very black and white, just to add a tiny bit of colour, so they're not important. What I am going to look at though are all these other crazy block looking things, and they don't look very pretty at all. What these are just, again, the individual pictures that I've made for each type of particle effect. So the reason why they look kind of dumb is when you first save images out from Photoshop or whatever program, Unity doesn't know how to read them. It doesn't know how it's meant to read it or imagine it. So we need to tell Unity that what they are, they're sprites. To do that, I'm just going to select all of them. Let's hold Command for Macs, or I believe Control for PCs. Then I'm just going to go up to the texture type over in the inspector on the right here. I'm going to change them all from default to sprites, 2D and UI. Then I can either hit apply down here in the inspector, or I can just click away. It'll ask if I want to apply that. I'm going to say yes. You'll notice that all those terrible looking squares have all become a little bit nicer, and you can start to see what they actually look like. They're much more usable looking now. However, there's one more thing we need to do before we can actually use these images as particles. Unity can't actually read straight images like that as particles. You need to turn them into materials first. So to do that, I'm just going to right click down here to create a new material. I'm going to start off calling this one Blue Star Material, just to match my blue star image there. Again, these images were all just created in Photoshop. You can use whatever you like to create them, or just use mine. With my new material, what I need to do to all of them is just hit Standard, move down into Particles, and hit Additive. Well, you'll notice it's changed and it's asking for a texture. To assign that texture, I can either hit Select there and type in my material, or I can just drag it and drop. Wonderful, so now we have a usable material that can be used inside our particle systems. So I'm just going to go on and create materials for each of the next particle images here. If I follow them along the bottom, I've got that's some birth material, I'm just going to call it Def Material. Then another Gummy Material. Create bit by bit Gummy Trail. Small material. Almost there. I'm just doing it in Unity as it's a little bit quicker to rename it. Two more. Perfect. So once again, we're just going to select all of them, Command or Control clicking. To save time, we're doing it all at the same time and hitting Shader, Particles, and going Additive. Then one by one, just dragging over the relevant texture onto that material. Didn't change that one, my bad. Left one, Gummy Trail. Small material is for our small balls texture. Smoke material, clearly for our smoke material texture there. Ooh, yep, that one's fine. Even if the image doesn't change immediately, I know it's loaded. And there we go. Now all our materials are loaded and ready to go. Alright. Now that we have all our materials made, I'm going to show you how to put together a particle system. If we go into prefabs, first of all though, I'm just going to show you what my prefabs look like. So if I grab my hit particle system here and just put it into my hierarchy, again that's just to look at the settings that I've created just through experimentation. All it's made up of is an empty, which is I'm using just as a folder to keep it all nice and contained, and then a few particle systems. So to create this, when you create it yourselves, just right click in the hierarchy, you want to create an empty. Again, we're using this just as a folder sort of thing, just to contain our project. Gonna rename it hit particles system. So it's a particle system that happens on a hit. I'm just gonna put the location back at the origin by resetting it. Doesn't really matter where you make it, so long as they all start in the same place. You'll notice mine's up in the side there. That doesn't matter because we'll change the location in code. With our particle system, those 4 different effects that we talked about at the beginning. For now, the reason why they're pink is because I haven't assigned my materials. Show you how to do that in a second, but with your system when you make it, to create each of the different particle systems there, you just right click again in the hierarchy, create a particle system, and drag that up to make it a child of the hit particle system if it wasn't already. Again, that's just so it's part of that standard hit, so that it's nicely packaged up all in together. With this particle system, you've noticed it's already started doing its thing. To assign a new material, all you have to do is go down into the renderer, this default particle, hit the circle on the side there, find a material that you want. So for example, if we were looking for our star sparkle, and assign that. With all the other particle systems, it's exactly the same thing. Just create new particle systems, drag it onto the parent so that it's all in the one folder. Call it whatever you want. You can right click, rename. Maybe I'll make this my blue stars system. Same thing, down in the renderer, hitting the circle on the side, and picking that material that we made together. So obviously it looks very different. All you have to do is muck with the settings until it's something that looks right. The important ones I do want to bring your attention to before I go back and show you the settings on my current systems is just the emission. Over here I think it's quite important. It is, well, very important, but if you change the rate over time to 0, so it's not emitting at all, and you hit this plus sign here under bursts, this is how we get this singular burst of stars there instead of a constant stream. So making this quite low, because the blue stars didn't have that many, 3 or 4. As you can see, it's only sending out a few. So that's a bit hard to find sometimes, so just wanted to point that out separately. Additionally, when you're making your systems, you want to make sure that looping is off. While you're adjusting the settings, you probably want to keep it on, because if it's off, you won't be able to see what changes you're making as you're making them, so it's good to be able to see, but once you're happy with all your settings, make sure you turn looping off before you save it all as a prefab. So continuing on with creating a particle system, I won't continue to make each of the different systems individually because, again, it just takes time adjusting of all those settings. But just to show you how to make it a prefab, in case you didn't know, once you're happy with your particle systems, just drag it down into the prefabs folder here. You'll see the name's turned blue, and that means that it's ready to put into our game once we're happy with the settings. I'm just going to delete that from the hierarchy for now, however. If we look into hit particles into the systems that I've got here, again, they're pink just because they're currently missing their texture there. So for the stars material, just going to quickly reassign our star material that we created together. Gummy stars, same thing. Gummy. Blue stars. And lastly, our sunflower. Doesn't that one look beautiful without its texture? Perfect. So now all together, let's take a closer look at what we've actually got going on here. So as you can see in the game view and that now, we have our beautiful burst going on. That's just done with a few different things. So first of all, looking back at the emission like we had a look at before, we're starting off with no rate over time or rate over distance, just 10 bursts as a minimum and 15 as a maximum. So there's only going to be between 10 and 15 particles made each burst. Other things that I've played around with here is just the start size, just to get it looking the way I want it to. The start speed, if I click on it and look at this particle system as curved, you've noticed that I've adjusted it with these Bezier curves and using these handles here. All I've done, the reason why I've made this curve here, is to make it start and speed up before slowing down and tapering off at the end. If you you have a lot of effects that want to follow the same curve, you might want to save it as a preset. To do that, just hit the cogs down here, select New, and you'll notice that your custom curves have been saved there, which is very helpful if you're duplicating the effect across different things. So my duration's only 1, and the lifetime's only 0.5 as well. So again, it's going to be quite a short emission. When I look at shape, so the shape is just probably quite obviously, again, the shape that your particles are being emitted from. So you can see I've got this little half circle here, as it is a hemisphere, and I've made it quite small, so the radius is quite low there. If I wanted to, I could make the radius any size, but because our particles are all emitting from one small contact point, I wanted a small shape to reflect that, so that when the particles emit, they all come out just from the middle there. They don't appear from somewhere out the sides, again, just because it's coming out from a small contact point. Velocity over lifetime, I've also got these custom curves, again, just to show that the speed of the little sparkles is just slowing down, so when it's closer to death, they'll slow down before they disappear. Delimiting the velocity over lifetime, that was my attempts at constraining the stars so that they stop around here instead of stopping super far out, getting too fast and ending up a million miles away from the character. So the limit there, again, is just to try and constrain it to a smaller field. The colour over lifetime. This one's a really fun, useful one to play with. So the first thing I want to draw your attention to is just this little waver in the middle here. So you notice I've turned it kind of dark, made it a bit lighter, and then faded back out to black again. The black, it sort of works a little bit like an alpha channel if your particle is just a standard additive particle, which it is at the moment. So white means that my particle is completely opaque at the beginning. The black, as you can kind of see there, I'll just turn looping on so you can see it. The black shows that it's just fading out at the end there. So if I remove this black and just turn it back to white, you'll notice my particle doesn't actually fade out, it just disappears at the end there. But you'll notice that it still goes kind of dim, a little bit kind of in the middle there. That's what this is doing, it's just adding a little bit of a sparkle to our effect, just to make it a little bit subtly more interesting. I'll talk a little bit more about these channels just a little bit later. But again, feel free to experiment with that. Like before, you can save your presets, which is really helpful if you're emulating similar effects across different particle systems. If I move over to size over lifetime, one thing I'd like to add here is just starting our particle system off small and then growing towards the end. So I'm just going to use one of the presets here, hitting the cog, and I want it to start big, so high up on the left side, and then, I want the opposite actually, so starting small and then ramping up as it gets to the end. That's looking a little bit more like our Kingdom Hearts effect. If I scroll down, we're just back to the renderer, which we've already worked with, so I'm just going to leave that alone. So that's the first particle system. The second particle system is the gummy stars. For a second, I'm just going to turn this off, and once again, turn on looping, remembering to turn off looping again from our stars system. Over in our gummy stars, you can see it's beautiful. It's starting to it floats down. It has got a little bit of that weight that I was talking about before, but I might just increase that by just playing with the gravity there, maybe ramping them up to 3 so they really fall down and feel a little bit heavier. You'll notice my duration is still quite short, 1.2. The speed, it's showing that it starts off quite fast at the beginning, but then tapers off and slows down. This is again because it starts off as maybe a bit of a burst, but then it doesn't go very far, it kind of just drops. So again, the speed lowering is just emulating that. Simulation speed 2, so this just doubles the speed that it plays at. That's important just again to try and get that burst without it going too far away, because if you just increase the speed, like for example if I change this to constant, if I make the speed go up, let's really ramp it up. It might be a bit hard to tell, but it's not really increasing the speed all that much. However, if I were to ramp up the simulation speed, look how fast that's going. So it's just an easy way of making it burst more without it flying too far away, which is what would happen if we adjusted the velocity. So I'm just going to undo that, turn it back to what it was. If I look at emission, again I've got only between 4 or 5 being made at a time. If I go to shape, once again I'm using my small hemisphere, just pointing away from the character so that these effects only burst outward and not backwards behind them. Not really using that one. I am limiting the velocity over time. It won't make too much of a difference with my hemisphere, but you can kind of see what difference it'll make if I play with these settings. You'll notice now that I've unlimited the velocity here, my star is flying really, really far along the x-axis here. I'll turn it back down so you can see the difference. See how constrained it is? So these are just constraining how far away, again, our particles can fly, which is really helpful if you're going for that speed, like I was trying to show you before, but you don't want it to fall that far away from the character. So 1.5 just seemed to create the range that I was looking for. So again, feel free to play with any of this in your own time. Size over lifetime, it's hard to see my curve. If I click it, I very painstakingly adjusted this to make it curve really high up, higher than it will allow me to actually look at. So this curve, what it's doing is it's starting it so that the particle starts out really small at the beginning. It grows really big really fast, so just like we had a look at when we were analysing our effects, starts small, grows big, and then just before it disappears, it very quickly becomes really small again. So you can kind of see here how my stars shrink back down again before they disappear. So that's done with this particle curve here in my size over lifetime. Again, that one really took a lot of mucking around, as you can't actually see how far the curve was, so it just takes a bit of practice and some intuition there. I've also added this little rotation over lifetime, just 30. You can kind of see if you look closely, my stars, they are turning slightly, they're all turning to the right to an angle of 30. If I make that a bit bigger, it'll be really obvious. They're really spinning now. So that's all that does. Really useful depending what you're doing, but I'm going to keep mine subtle as it is in our example. Down in the renderer, we've already assigned our material. However, you'll remember that these stars, they lasted quite a while, but they also had their own glow. Now, I'm not sure exactly how to create their own glow normally, but what I'm going to use instead is just a trail here. So if I click open the trail, you'll notice you can't assign the texture of a trail within the Trails tab, so it's not super intuitive, but if you just go back down into renderer, you notice trail material, it's here. And it's just one of the materials we assigned earlier. So if I just type in trail, woohoo! So these trails, they aren't the best, but again, that's just a way I'm trying to simulate that glow that we saw in our example. If I look back at my trails tab, I've just got these as my settings. I didn't really play with it much. Yeah, important though to make it die with the particles so they don't last forever and do weird things like that. So that's the second system that we've built for our particle systems here. If we go now to our blue stars system, woohoo, how cute is that? I've already had a quick look at how to do this one, but again, if you'd like to have a look and see what my settings are, play with them yourselves. My speed, 11.1, start size, 0.2, quite small. They go quite slowly, simulation speed's only 1. I'm only creating 2 or 3 at a time. The shape, I've got them emitting from a circle this time instead of a hemisphere, but because I have the circle tilted, it's actually doing quite a similar job. It doesn't really matter too much. Limiting their velocity once again. Just making them fade out. I'm not making these ones sparkle like the other ones or anything like that, nothing complicated. Just turning to black at the end to have a nice fade out. It has the same curve on the size over lifetime as our other stars, so shrinking, going bigger and then shrinking out. That's all pretty standard. Moving to our sunflare system, so this is the last one in our standard hit, turning looping on again. This one I wanted to be quite short, as it doesn't really appear for long. Notice it looks kind of weird just when it's by itself. The main difference I wanted to point to is the emission and max particles. So obviously I'm constraining this to only one. I don't want a million of these sun flares coming out at a time. Just a one where the creature is hit. The shape, I'm creating it from an edge just so I could very clearly see where it's going to come from. If I adjust the edge and make it a bit bigger, you can see this line. If I made the line small, I just found it really easy to use that to place my particle system. As it's large, it's just a bit harder to tell where it's going to spawn from, as it can spawn from anywhere along that line, which again isn't what I wanted. I want it to be nice and contained and just spawn in that little space there. Color over lifetime. So this one's starting to look a little bit more complicated. So if I save this as a preset, just so I can muck with it, and then let's get rid of everything for a moment. Alright, so now you can probably see some of the differences. So it's just flashing, appearing and disappearing, which doesn't look very good. So all I've done, I've added a black color just at the beginning, just so it fades in, and black at the end as well, just so it fades back out. However, if we look back at our Kingdom Hearts tutorial, we'll notice that as it fades out, it actually does change colour a little bit, if you remember that. So to simulate that, just make two there. What I'm going to do is make the colour, again, just as dark pink purple, so that as it fades out, it takes on that nice tinge as it disappears. And then just as I wasn't quite happy with the colour of my sprite, I just added this yellow, just to try and make it a little bit paler and brighter at the beginning there, to make the contrast even stronger. So again, feel free to play with it as much as you like until you find something that looks good to you, or it could be completely different, that's totally fine. Then, if I look at my renderer, something that you might have to play with, depending if when you make your own particles in the future, if you didn't make them big enough, you might need to adjust this max particle size as you import them. That does change the amount that you can, the size that you can make your particles, so you can change the start size as much as you want. However, if they're not changing size, you might be limited by your max particle size, so do have a look at both if you're trying to make bigger particles than what Unity seems to be allowing you to do. So now that that's all done, I'm going to go back and just make sure looping is turned off for all of my systems here. Again, I don't want them playing constantly, I just want them to happen on the hit. Once I've double checked that, I'm just going to go to my hit particles, hit apply. So again, it's a nice prefab, they're all saved nice and individually. If I'm feeling paranoid, I might want to apply each of my systems one by one, just to make sure that yes, all my settings have been saved. The last thing I want to draw your attention to on my hit particle system is that on the empty itself, I've got this script here, this effects self-destruct script. It's probably really self-explanatory what it does. Just quickly, if you don't know how to assign a script, down in your assets folder, I've got it included in our tutorial. It's just the effects self-destruct. You can drag and drop it, or if you want, you can hit add component, and you should be able to type it in and add it that way. However, I'm just going to open it up and quickly show you what's inside. Alright, so there's not much in here, really short. I'm not even using, no I am using, so I've got this public float here. Because it's public, that just means that in our Unity inspector, when I've got our hit particle selected, you can actually see the time to wait and you can readjust it if you want to. That just, all it does here is I'm destroying the game object that this script is assigned to, which in this case is a hit particle system, after the time to wait, which is 0.95 seconds, has passed. So all I'm doing with that is that each time I hit an opponent, it's going to create one of these hit particles. So this whole folder, the prefab, it's going to create one of them on the spot of impact. It's while they're not looping, so they're only going to play once. I don't want to start, if you're hitting lots of opponents, you don't want to have a million hit particle systems within your hierarchy that have been created. You don't want a million new game objects that aren't doing anything. That'll really start to slow down your game over time if you've got all these stray objects. So that's why this script is here, just to destroy it after the particle system has done its thing, so we don't have a million extra game elements hanging out. Alright, if we continue with our tutorial, first of all I'm just going to set our scene a little bit more and give us something to hit. Then I'm going to create something that we can hit with. So first of all, if I select our third person controller, you'll notice that up in the top right here, the tag is already preset as the player. That's people who made it know it's a player, so they're setting the tag as lots of things, lots of different scripts and stuff often look for the player for certain effects. What we're going to do ourselves is we're just going to create a 3D object. I'm just going to make a cube. It doesn't really matter how big it is, but I don't want it to be too small or it'll be hard to hit. So I'm just going to turn the scale up. Let's make it a bit intimidating. That's too intimidating for me. 1.5 on each axis. I'm just going to move it forward a bit. Doesn't really matter where it is so much. Just in front of our character though. I'm going to go to materials and I'm just going to give it a colour, not for any reason, but just will look a bit nicer. I'm going to rename it to target, so it's just what we're trying to hit. In target, I want us to go to the tags up here, so right now it's untagged. I'm going to give it the enemy tag. In the future, we'll be making some custom tags, in which case you might want to add tag. To make a custom tag, all you need to do is hit a plus there, name your tag and save it, then go back to your object, and then it should show up at the bottom there. So for example, if I were to tag it as a target instead of enemy, becomes there. Woohoo! Go back to my target, and there's our target tag at the bottom. So I'm using this enemy tag. If it's not there already as one of the presets, again, just make it in the same way we made the target tag. So now my box is tagged as an enemy. I'm out to get it. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create another object. 3D object, I'm just going to make a cylinder. I'm just going to quickly change its size by using boxes here. I'm going to make it really skinny and make it a bit longer, make it a bit skinnier. I'm just making a sort of weapon to use. I'm going to move it so it's near our character, ready to strike. There it is. Make it look pretty. To change between these different ways of adjusting it, I'm just using the W E key for rotation and the R key for scale. W is for movement, sorry. If you've never done that before as well. So again, this doesn't matter too much, so long as it's in front of your character there. Also gonna give it a colour. I like colours. Okay, now that we've got our weapon, something that's really important to do is, here it is here. I'm just gonna call it our weapon so we don't get lost. Ooh. Rename. Sometimes it's a bit annoying calling it our weapon. Now that it's near our character, I'm just going to drag it and make it a child of our first person character controller. So the reason why we made the weapon a child of the third person controller is just so that it follows our character around. So if I get rid of the camera that came with the scene, and we just go back into the prefabs folder inside the Invector third person controller in our assets here. So keep opening the folders until you get to prefabs. There's this third person camera here which we didn't add before. I'm just going to drag and drop that onto our third person controller. Make sure it's on the third person controller as well, as otherwise it's not going to follow the character, it's not going to be a very effective camera for us. Then I'm just going to move it so it's kind of behind the character, rotate it a bit, just to try and make this viewport look a little bit nicer. Once I'm more or less happy with it, that's fine. Just going to quickly play to show you what I mean. So you can see, as I move around, that new weapon of ours is just following the character model around. So that's all we need for now. Perfect. So now that we've got that, we're just going to look back at our box target here for a little while. So when we have the weapon hit the box, we actually need it to hit the box. We need the box to have a rigid body. The reason for this is because if we don't have a rigid body, because of the way we want to have contact, if we don't have a rigid body, it's just not going to register where on the box we hit it with the stick. We could do it just as a normal collider, so that if we just hit the box in general, it will spawn an explosion or the prefab of the particle effects on the staff or something. To make it more accurate though, I'm making a rigid body, again just so we can find the exact contact point so that we can spawn the explosion from there. It doesn't matter too much the settings there, but you can play with it in your own time if you were really that curious. However, just in resources, so make sure we go back over to my prefabs and not the Invector ones. Over in scripts, again, we have some custom ones here that I've made up. The two we want to put on our box, or our target, is box follow. So I'm going to drag and drop it to the bottom there. And we also want box health script. While we're here, I'm also going to create in the hierarchy a new empty. I'm going to call this empty enemy manager. And on enemy manager, I'm just going to give it the enemy spawn script. So first of all, we'll just have a look at our box follow script. We'll just go through them all so you can see what I've done, why I'm doing it. So box follow here, pretty standard script. I'm just making a couple of variables to have a maximum speed and a maximum moving speed there. I'm creating a transform just so I can find a player here. You can see here, find object, game object with tag, and the tag is player, so those tags we were talking about become important. Without it, I wouldn't be able to find my player, my box wouldn't know what to turn and look at. Then I'm just using some pretty standard transform rotations, so adjusting the rotation in world space and transforming the position to look at and move the player. A lot of the scripts I'm using are taken from either other tutorials or Unity's handbooks and things like that. While some scripts are written from scratch, others are just pieced together from what I can find and what I know. So if you are curious, I've also included a README file in my documents in which you can see where I've taken all these scripts from, in case you wanted to look at some of these source materials. In any case though, this is just a basic look at the player, move towards the player script, nothing that special. Staying on the target, the other script we've put on it is this box health script. You'll notice it's got two public variables here, one for health and one for death system. So if we open it up, ooh, pretty simple looking still, isn't it? Awesome, so again, another transform, which means we just made room for another game object there, in this case, the death system. All this variable is doing is it's keeping track of this box's individual health. So at the moment that health is set to 3. All it's saying here is if health is smaller than or equals 0, if it runs out of health, then I'm going to instantiate or create an instance of the death system, which is the game object that I'm putting on the script, at the position and rotation of the box itself. Then I'm going to go into enemy spawn script, which we'll be looking at, which will be on our enemy manager. I'll have a look at that for a second, and I'm lowering the current enemy count just by 1 there. Then I'm destroying the box. So all I'm doing is I'm creating the death system, minusing 1 from my enemy count, and then destroying the box as it's been killed, defeated. Woohoo, nice work. So, you'll notice, again, this death system here, I do need to put something on it. It is a public one. I do need to assign our death system. If I have a look at our death system, that's our second particle system, which we'll go through in just a moment. For now though, just find a prefab. Feel free to drag that onto the none transform here, just to assign it there. If we look over at our enemy manager, we'll just have a quick look at the enemy spawn script before we go through our death system. You'll notice there are two public variables here as well, the amount to spawn and the enemy game object. The amount to spawn I'm not using at the moment, but the enemy game object, that's just going to be our target. Since we've got all our settings put together, if we turn our target into a prefab, woohoo, go back to our enemy manager, drag the target onto our enemy game map object, it's going to know what object it's going to be spawning onto our map. So we have a quick look at the script, nothing crazy as well. Again, I'm not using the amount to spawn, but I've got it set up so that if you did want to spawn more enemies at the beginning, You can set that here yourself. For now though, all I want is 1 or 2 enemies on the battlefield. All it's doing is if to kind of an enemy count, so that count that's being subtracted each time we destroy a target, if that is less than the amount to spawn, which it constantly is at the moment, it's just going to find a random position. These values here I have for my random position, that's just the size, that's just slightly less than the size of my stage, so it's always going to spawn somewhere within my field that I've created there. Just back over to monodevelop. So just finding a random space within my stage, creating a new instance of the enemy game object, which we assigned as the target, in a new position, which is just our randomized values, +1, so that it's making sure it's not spawning inside the stage. Quaternion identity, that's just a rotation, so it's just going to instantiate at the rotation of the enemy manager, which is just standard, nothing special. Set the default of 0, and then the current enemy count is just going to go back up to show that we've got a new enemy. Woohoo! Nice work, spawner. So that's all fine. Now that we've had a look at our basic scripts there, we're just going to have a look at that def system which we put into our target. So you're going to find it's very similar to our hit particle system. It was created in the same way, so just by creating an empty to become our folder or our parent, and then creating a few different particle systems to create the effects that occur when our target dies. Like our other system, however, we're just going to have to reassign each of the materials so that we don't get these terrible purple boxes. So, def sunflare system, once again, go to the renderer, find the missing material, in this case, def sunburst material. Woohoo, look at that. Dark purple system, oh man, again, they're so gorgeous when they don't have their materials. Just going to find, what did I call it? Let's have a quick look. Smoke. Huh, that's what happens when you name your variables inconsistently. So this one's a smoke material. This one, the small ball system. Remember, I called that small material, which is also an unintuitive name, so beware of that. And this one, it's once again, it's just a duplicate of our def sunburst material there. One change I'm going to quickly make, however, is dark purple system. So if we remember those clouds that come up when the enemy dies, they're really dark and dense. Right now, this system's coming up is really light. The difference that I'm going to make with this particle system, but not any of the others, is I'm going to find its material. I'm going to click on it. I'm going to change its shader. So all of our particles have been on additive. These, as far as I can tell, just seem to be sort of like different layer effects. It just changes the way these particle systems work. I'm going to change it to... let's have a look at that one. How does that one look? Nope, still not. Still, it has changed. It's not as bright, but not as dark as I want it to be. Let's give multiply a go. Always a dark one. Now it's looking a bit too dark, because if you remember, it's a little bit light just on the outsides. So I'm just going to try a multiply double. There, that's looking a little bit closer to what I want. So you'll notice it's still dark in the middle, but the outside is a little bit lighter. The colour's changed a little bit, so that's perfect. That's what I'm looking for. So the settings on this guy here, once again, our duration's 1.2. Its lifetime matches that. Speed, it's quite low. It's because I want turn looping on so we can see it. I don't want this guy to go that far. It stays kind of as a cloud. It raises a little bit, but doesn't go crazy. Size is pretty small as well. Again, I don't need it to be too massive. Just trying to match up to the animation. Gravity, I've got it as -3, so this is just so the particles float upwards like it does in the animation. Notice, of course, if I change it, they'll stay more centralized, and I don't want them falling. So again, I've just got a slight negative value to make them just start lifting slightly though. Max particles, 400. Unlike the other stars and stuff, I'm not showing as much restraint. I just want a lot of particles coming out. So emission, 500 coming out over time. This time I'm emitting it in a cone shape, which I've made to be quite small, just to keep it as a little mass in front of the character there. Again, feel free to mess with it in any way that you like. That's just the one that I chose. Kind of fun to play with as well. It's just this emit from. It can either emit from the actual base, which in this case is this full circle in there, or if you change it to volume or other ones, you can start getting some really interesting shapes. We don't need that for now, but I think it's fun. Anyway, so keeping it back to base, I'm also changing the colour a bit over the lifetime. So because of the difference in the way our particle is working, because we've changed from additive to multiplied double, if we use the same way to fade our particles in and out as we have in the other systems, so by having, for example, if I add this preset, one of the other ones that we've used, you'll notice it's not actually fading in or out. They're still just disappearing, the colour's changed a bit. It's just not doing the same thing, it doesn't have the same effect. And so instead of fading in and out with the colour like we've been doing, we're just going to fade in and out with these tabs at the top. So the ones at the bottom sort out the colour, the ones at the top deal with the alpha, which is basically just a transparency. So if we make extra tabs there, we'll turn the first one, turn the alpha right down, on the end one, turning the alpha right down, just making sure we don't have any colours coming in either. We don't want that black one, otherwise it's just going to misfigure it. So again, all that's doing is allowing our particles to fade out instead of just disappearing and fading in a little bit, just to be a bit smoother as well. So it's just nice to know that when you're looking for the transparency, it's not going to be in the colour tab, which may be confusing because if you adjust the colour at the start, the alpha channel is right at the bottom there. It's right at the bottom with the colour sliders, whereas again, if you're adjusting the colour over the lifetime, the alpha channel isn't with the other settings. It's in its separate slider at the top here. It's just useful to know the difference there. So that's more or less the only differences. So the size of it, also it's not going in bursts like the other ones, it's just emitting a bunch of them at the same time. And that's about it. You'll notice I've got my self-destruct script on it as well. It doesn't matter if you have them on individually or on the def system itself, so long as they disappear at some point. I'm just going to add it to this one as well, just so we don't have the empty sitting around as well. Oh, that's the wrong script. Self-destruct. I'm going to give it a little bit extra time, just because the particles in this one take a little bit longer. Anyway, so that's the dark purple system. Just going to turn looping off there. You'll notice the simulation speed is a little bit higher as well with 3, but feel free to experiment. In the sun flare system, so this is a different sun flare to the other one, although I'll understand if you think they look the same. So with our def sun flare system, again, we'll just quickly look at the sprites so that you can see how they're actually different. Assets, materials. So we have our def sunburst here and the other sunburst. So you'll notice the basic sunburst that's happening when we hit, it's the inside dense bit is quite small, it's warmer around the edges there, it's more like rays of light, whereas the def sunburst, it's got that much denser bit in the middle, it's lighter, so it's a lot more yellow and golden in comparison to our other sunbursts. So again, just pointing out that they are in fact different. Coming back to our project here, so our def sun flare system, a few special things have been applied to this one as well. So you can see duration, it's quite short, it's just a really quick burst. You can see it's quite pale, but I have got it turning to pink, which is again just using the colour over lifetime. I'm turning it to a much brighter pink to match up with the animation than the other one. So you can once again see the subtle difference between the other sunburst's effect, how it's turning to a dark purple, and this one's just turning to a lighter purple to differentiate it a little bit more. Start size 4.5, again I'm trying to make it a bit bigger there. Emission exactly the same as before, I'm only making 1. I've got it just on a small edge instead of making a cone or anything like that. and that's really all the changes that are in this one. You might notice, however, here in our hierarchy inside our prefab, our def system one, we've got two of these def sun flares. The reason for that is because I just wanted to make sure that it would look a little bit more accurate from a couple of different angles. So if I pause it there, you'll notice this sun flare is showing up in front, so it's between the player and the purple particles there. However, from the other side, it's a bit hard to tell. Oh, yep, there it goes. From the other side, you'll notice the particles, obviously from this side, the purple one is in front. So the other one is just on the other side, just so that it's more likely that the sun flare will, or the def sun flare will show up in front of the purple cloud, just as that's how it looks in the animation. So again, I'm just trying to emulate that. Last thing here are just those last little balls that we pointed out in our breakdown. Pretty simple, it's just a small circle material. This one I think is really cute, nice and easy, quick duration again, quite fast. I've got simulation speed up a bit as well there, they're quite small. In the emission, only making 8 or 10 of them. Shape, once again I've got my little hemisphere. Colour over lifetime, this one's important as we noticed in the tutorial, they start off white but then they turn into pink, bright pink, just as they reach the end of their lifespan. So you can see they were quite easy and quite effective to emulate with our colour over time gradient here. And that's really all there is. Everything else is the same to our other particle systems. So that's the def system. So now we have two different particle systems here, the def system and our hit particles. So I'm just going to delete them because they're saved as prefabs and we don't actually need them in the scene. Alright, what we're going to move on to next is just equipping our weapon so that it can actually hit that box. So before we added a rigid body to our box, that way we could actually hit it with the weapon, we need one for the weapon as well, so that's the first thing we'll add. So just a rigid body. It doesn't really matter what it has here in the settings as we're not going to be it's not going to be moving, we want it to stay next to character, so it doesn't really matter if it has them. However, you probably do want to turn gravity off, and to stop it from flying away as a rigid body when it hits other obstacles, which, let's have a quick look and see if it does that. Oh, yep, look at that, it's doing some weird things. We're just going to hit is kinematic as well. So if we play our scene, once again, sticking nicely, it's not flying away or anything like that. Nice and easy. You'll also notice that our boxes are spawning successfully and heading towards the player in overwhelming numbers. Good job setting that up. Awesome. Now that it's got a rigid body, it can actually hit the other rigid body in the correct way. So now we just have some more scripts that we're going to add onto it. So the one we haven't used yet is this weapon swing, which we're just going to drag onto our weapon, or you can add it on the add component if you want as well though. Awesome. So there are a couple of other things we need. One of the things I want to do as well is just add some sound effects for when we hit the target, so that we have sound effects that either happen when we hit a target or a different sound effect for when we destroy a target. So to actually load them, we need to have an audio source on our weapon here, which is where I'm going to be storing the sounds. So just going to make an audio source. We don't actually need to put anything on it. If we were putting music in it, you'd want to get rid of the play on awake, but because I'm not loading any clips straight away, nothing there really matters that much. In our weapon script here, just at the bottom, we'll look into it a little bit closer in a moment, but you can see already we have an explosion prefab, in which the one we want to put there, you'll remember we already assigned our def system prefab, which the box itself will spawn once it dies. So for the weapon, the one we want instead is just our hit particles system. So this is one we completed, hit particles, that's the one. So I'm going to hit the weapon, find my script, and drag hit particles into the explosion prefab there. this force, we'll have a look at the code in a moment, but as we saw in our breakdown, when you hit the opponent did slide back a little bit. So this force here is actually just emulating that. It's just how much force we're going to hit our target with. The higher that number, obviously the further away our opponent's going to be. So while we would want it really subtle, you can ramp this up if you want. It's a really useful effect if you're making games and stuff, but that's just where it is and what it's doing here, so we can change it as we play if we wanted to. The next two things in our script here is this H array and this destroyed sound. The H array, H is standard for hit, so this was an array to store the different sounds that could play when we hit our target. So if we go down to sounds in our assets folder, you'll notice we have 2 ding sounds. This could be as many as we wanted, but I just wanted to have choice so that when we hit the box, it's not going to get too monotonous with the same sound playing again and again. So I'm just going to drag one onto my array here. So it's got 1 ding, adding a second ding there. For the destroyed sound, that's the sound it's going to play once we destroy a target instead, so clearly that's the destroyed sound here. Again, please check the README to find the sources of these sound effects, but they're all being used under Creative Commons. So now that we have our sounds loaded onto our weapon, we're just going to open up the script to see what's happening, what are we doing. Let's have a look. Awesome, so this one's looking a little bit longer. So you'll notice I've added some of the accreditation at the top there, but again, they're just going to be included in a README text document as well. We've got a lot of variables happening here, but the ones you should recognize straight away are our transform, our public transform, which is holding our explosion prefab, which we just assigned. We have a force, again, it's public so that it can be assigned from the inspector. We also have some private floats, the swing duration and the swing speed. These are pretty self-explanatory. Swing duration is just the length, how long it takes to swing. You can change that if you want. And the swing speed is just how quickly we're swinging our weapon as well. I'm using a swinging and has hit a couple of bools here as well, or boolean variables. This is just to determine whether or not we're still swinging the weapon, whether our weapon is in the process of being swung. That way we can tell it if it's not swinging, it can swing. If it is swinging, we don't want it to just keep trying to start the swing at the beginning each time. And it has hit is just to try and prevent the weapon from making multiple particle explosions from the one hit, so that if it swings and it hits something, has hit will trigger, so that during that same swing we can't play the animation too many times. We've also got the array in which we put our hit sound, so our hit array. We've also got the destroyed sound, and we're also loading that audio source so that we can load the sounds into the audio source and play them. So just starting at the beginning, the start button to start pause, that's just the starting position and rotation of our weapon there. Then we're also, once again, loading that audio source so that it's ready to use. We're using on collision enter so that when the weapon, when its collider collides with the enemy, it'll do a thing. Pretty simple. So you can see if when it collides, it's going to run this if statement here. What it's checking for is if what it collides with, which is a collision, if the game object that did the collision, if its tag is the enemy, so if it's the box and it's not colliding with the wall or the floor or something that's not an enemy, and we're swinging, so if we are actually swinging the weapon, so our hit isn't going to trigger if we simply run into the box with our weapon, we actually have to hit the enemy while we're swinging the weapon, which the swing is just being calculated down here in the update, but we'll look at that in a second. So if we're swinging our weapon, not just running into the bad guy, and we haven't hit the enemy yet, so again, just to try and prevent this collision from happening multiple times in the same swing, we're using contact point to find out the exact point in which the weapon is hitting our enemy here. And we're just saving that under contact, making a new rotation there and a new position, again just to save that contact point so that we can use it. Then on that contact point, and all that, we're instantiating or creating an instance of our explosion prefab, which you'll remember is our hit particles, at the position and the rotation of the contact point, which is again why we have those rigid bodies. Feel free to steal this code as well. Next, so now that we've instantiated our actual particle effect system, remember, just quickly, we're using our hit particles, which includes all the different child particle effects, so that's 4 particle explosions that are happening at the same time there. We're also going to load a sound, so you'll notice I'm loading the sound clip H sound, which is just the audio source. We're getting the audio source and loading a clip. The clip we're loading is in the array, the hit array, and we're getting a random number between 0, so we can get the first item in the array, a random number between that and the length of the array. So if you don't already know, we've got harray.length. This number is just however long our array is, which in this case, there are 2 things in the array, it's going to be 2. So that way you can always randomize to the amount of things in an array, you don't need to change it yourself. And then it's just playing whichever clip we loaded into that audio source though. So the next thing that's happening here is, you'll remember that we're kicking back the opponent. The opponent is being sent back when we hit them with that force that we had there. So we're creating a new vector. This vector is to find out the direction that we need to send a bad guy in. As of course, we can't just say, go backwards, because in Unity terms, backwards means a particular axis. It's maybe it might be backwards on the x axis or backwards on the z axis, but it's not relative to your character's position. So this new vector here is just making sure we get a direction which is relative to your character's position there. So it's just a contact point of the weapon minus the position of the weapon. Then we're getting the collision, which remember is the object that we've collided with. So in this case, that's the box. So we're getting the box, which is a game object, and we're getting a component from it, which in this case is the rigid body. So this is another reason for using the rigid body. It's just making sure we can push on that box, we can add force to it. In which case we're just using the direction and our force variable there. Add force, that's just a preset command, I'm not doing anything there. It's just, again, adding force to that rigid body as per our parameters that we've provided. Now that we've pushed back that game object there, with that pushback as well, you probably want to make sure your box has gravity if it doesn't. So if we have a look at our target in the rigid body, you'll notice it does have gravity. If you don't have gravity, when we hit our box, it's going to go flying off into the stratosphere and it'll never land back on the ground again. So again, just double check that so that we don't lose our bad guys forever. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to load the box health script. So sometimes this can be a little bit tricky, as we want the box health script of the box that we collided with. So of course it's a local script, it's not a static script, which are really easy to load up. So you're just typing box health script, its local position, its local reference or address is going to be local script, and to load box health script onto local script, we need to again get our collided object, .game object, and we're calling a different component, which of course in this case is box health script. So once we do have box health script loaded successfully into our project, we just have to go into it. So we're going into box health script through the local address to get the specific box health script we want of the correct box and not all of them, and we're just subtracting from the health, which if you remember, the box has 3 health at the moment, so that means if we hit the same box 3 times and we hit it 3 times, the box will get destroyed, which will spawn all of our particle effects and hopefully play a sound and everything will be dandy. So you'll notice as well here that we have one last check. So if box health script, if the health does go below 0, if we do destroy the box, then we're loading the destroyed sound clip instead of our hit sound clip, and we're just playing that one instead. Alright, so just looking at the bottom half of our script now. So first of all, we're just getting an input, which, as you can see, is just a mouse click. So on left mouse click, if that happens, and we're not swinging the weapon. So again, we're just trying to stop, we're just trying to make sure we swing the weapon completely and reset before we can swing the weapon again. So we just can't infinitely swing per second, so we're just limiting that. So if we get a mouse input and we're not already swinging, we're going to swing the weapon. When we're swinging the weapon, so if swinging, we're going to start a timer going, which is just going up per seconds, as per normal, time.delta time. We're checking how far through the timer we are. So this swing duration divided by 2, that's just saying if we're less than half way through the swing duration, we're going to do this. If we're over half of the swing duration, we're going to do that. So when we're less than half, what we're doing here is we're transforming the Euler angles and we're transforming the position. What you'll notice though is that we're transforming the local Euler angles and the local position. This means that when we transform the angles or the position of the weapon, it's going via, again, it may seem obvious, but we're going by the local positioning, so we're not going by world space. So that means that when we move our weapon, it's going to move relative to the original position, relative to the positioning of the weapon itself, not relative to its overall position in the game environment. So then we're just using a lerp, which is just a basic animation, to move our weapon and rotate it 200 degrees, or just 200 on the x-axis there, and just going at the swing speed that was described above. So doing basically the exact same thing, but just transforming to position here as well. So just moving it quite a lot on the z-axis, hopefully just to make it obvious. So all this is doing is emulating that slide forward that Sora does when he hits one of the Heartless, which should be done in the animation, but I'm not dealing with animations here today. Just working with codes and the particle effects. And that's just rotating the weapon so it kind of looks like we're swinging it. Then again, when we're less than when we're over half way through our timer, we're just going to do the opposite. We're just resetting the Euler angles, the local Euler angles, back to where it was, and same for our positioning here. The last thing that's happening here is when we've reached our swing duration and exceeded it, we're just resetting everything, so we're no longer hitting, we're no longer swinging, we're all done, and everything resets as normal. Before you go back to your project, just change the 20 here, just down to a 5, as moving it by 20 is a little bit out of control. 5 is a lot more reasonable. Alright, so just quickly before we continue, I'm just going to double check. I think I left one of the loopings on in my prefab, that's the one. I'm just going to make sure that's turned off and applying that so that it doesn't hang around for too long. Alright, so back in a project space, we're just going to press play and make sure everything's working. So, yep, we can move our character around, that looks good. If we click, we swing the weapon. If our weapon hits a box, nothing happens, so it's not reading the collision if we're not swinging our weapon. If we do hit a box, awesome, so it's playing different sound effects each time. I don't know if you noticed, but when we hit that box for the third time, it played a different sound effect. So we've got our randomized sounds working, we have a different sound on kill. I can see that both particle systems are working here. You can see all the extra particles appearing on death. If we turn sideways, you can also see that the weapon is moving forward and rotating correctly. And just to show you, if I open up my character controller here, and if I change the amount of force we're using to 2000, it'll really illustrate just how much we could kick back, and that we actually are kicking back these objects. They are indeed being forced back using our code there. So thanks so much for watching. Hopefully you got something out of this. You're welcome to use my particle sprites for your own particle effects if you want. And yeah, thank you for listening.